So we're just going to have a look at this chart with reference to this notion of rulerships and dignities and everything, and how can all of that show us something about the individual. And again, notice that it doesn't, this is William, who's one day, ideally, I suppose, he wants to be king or will be king, whether he wants it or not. And what it shows is not, is this person rich? Is this person famous? None of these things. It's about what do they experience? How do they experience their life? And also when these things happen, let's say fame or wealth or whatever, how do they relate to that? How might it show up in the world? So you have to think of the chart as this very multi-dimensional thing. It's not just the perspective of the individual on their own life. It's also the perspective of others on the individual, and it's the way that life interacts with them. So we have to think about it from all different facets. So let's take this chart. It's the 21st of June, 1982 at 2103 in Paddington, which is London. I have a suspicion that this was a cesarean birth, but I have a suspicion that it was a cesarean for specific occult reasons. One of them being that this is the most perfect chart you could imagine for a king. It's just remarkable. It's very strong for a king, but not necessarily for an individual. So it's not an easy chart. When we see, for example, a Sagittarius ascendant, especially when the ruler is in the 12th house, which I'll tell you about in a moment, with Sagittarius ascendant, and then the moon and the sun together in the 8th house, the sun in Cancer. So even just the sun in Cancer and the ascendant in Sagittarius tells us that there's a lot of issues in this family with mothers, problems with mothers, separation from mothers, distance from mothers, mothers unable to do their jobs, mothers unwilling to do their jobs, mothers prevented from being mothers, etc., etc. So we just have to find out the individual flavor of that in each person's chart. And we see obviously his mother was Princess Diana, and her mother abandoned her when she was very small. And then he, of course, was, so we could call it abandoned through divorce by his own mother. And then quite young, he was 16 when she actually died. So again, these are the indicators of these planets. And it's a very, very sad story for somebody who's in a very prominent position. So this is one way of helping to see how these different aspects work out. So here I could even just remove these planets, but let's just keep them in for the sake of argument. But we're going to ignore the outer planets. Remember that they're generational planets. They don't really help us to define the quality of the chart. The aspects from those planets will help us determine other things that are going on in the person's life, but they're not helping us understand the quality of the chart. So before I continue with this chart, do you have any questions or any observations that you want to reflect on?
Are you going to go a little bit more into how you got to that analysis that you just said about the mothers? Will you say more about that?
Yeah, did you say that it's the ascendant in Sagittarius that indicates what you said about him having difficulties with his mother?
So is that plus the sun in Cancer?
Okay.
The combination of an ascendant in Sagittarius and the sun in Cancer will give this result in every chart. You just have to find the degree of the result, or to what extent you're finding it. This is a lot of what this book that I'm working on is talking about. It really, you could literally read an entire person's life based on just the ascendant and the sun. And if you add the moon, it's just that extra dimension. But then all of the rest of the chart flushes out the story. Equally, if you see, to a certain extent also, if you have a Sagittarius sun and a Cancer rising, that's also difficult. And there are a number of reasons for this. Let's just use this chart as the example. We'll see other charts as we go through the course that also help us. So aside from the fact that the sun is in Cancer representing mothers, where is the sun in this chart?
In the 8th house.
In the 8th house. So that's not an easy house, is it?
No. Yeah.
We know that planets in the 8th house, like we can see also sometimes in the 3rd as well. The 6th, the 8th, and the 12th houses come with particular life challenges that often for an individual feel they can be very private, but they often feel like obstacles or difficulties that they have to overcome in life. So when the person's sun is in the eighth house, there's something that is that's uncomfortable. It's challenging. It becomes a bigger issue. And by the way, just on a purely esoteric note, you can notice that this is also a similar chart, not similar, but the ascendant in Sagittarius and the sun in Cancer is also the same as what the United States has. So, like issues with motherland, issues with being abandoned, issues with being far away, issues of not connecting. So the other aspect is the literal, as the astrological aspect, which we'll get to when we go through the charts bit by bit, is the inconjunct between the first and the eighth house. So we see that there is an inconjunct. It's neither an opposition nor is it a square. It's not. It's an awkward relationship between Sagittarius and Cancer. So it requires a lot of adjustment. It's there, but we're not really able to access it. So that inconjunct is another way of looking at that. So from the first house, the sixth house, and the eighth house are inconjunct, or another way you can call that is quincunx. That's another description, quincunx. And so there's not an easy relationship if somebody has their sun in the sixth or the eighth house. In any chart, it doesn't matter. So if you open up a chart and you're looking, you say, oh, wait, sixth house or eighth house sun. All right, here we have an issue with this person from the beginning with the relationship between them and their parents. And if we look at this chart from the point of view of the parents, because this is, of course, William's chart, but it's also the transit chart of his parents. So Prince Charles and in those days, Princess Diana, or Lady Diana, when they connected, this chart tells a little bit about them too. So there's a whole dynamic here that you can look at, and you pull these things back through the life of William. So he starts out with this awkward relationship between his parents. And it's also when you see that there is a nodal axis prominent, we know that there's an eclipse. And the royal family has form when it comes to eclipses. Many of them are born around eclipses, which is pretty significant in and of itself. And in this case, it's a new moon eclipse, and it's in the eighth house. So with reference to that Cancer Capricorn quality, right? So we're looking at Cancer ruled by the moon, which is on the north node. So there's a lot of emotionality here, a lot of let's say, obligation or duty that is imposed. And again, we're not looking at this from William's perspective. We're looking at this from the perspective of the parents of William, so Diana and Charles. And we see that there's some kind of duty obligation factor that's built into this as well.
Sorry, really, can I interject really quick? You mentioned the relationship between him and his parents, and I'm just a little lost on where you're. Is that because of the eighth and sixth house, or because of the sun?
So there's multiple layers of relationships here that you can find in a natal chart. This is William's natal chart. And before we even get to William and his relationship to his parents, we're looking at his parents' relationship between the two of them, between Charles and Diana in William's chart, because this is the transit chart that his parents were experiencing on the day that he was born. And it tells us a lot about the family lineage. It tells us a lot about what is already underway. And then William plops into this, or is taken out by cesarean at a specific time, depending on your conspiratorial leanings. And hang on just one moment. I've got to bring the dog back in. I'll be right there. Sorry. Right, sorry about that. So do you see where I'm going with this? So when we look at a natal chart, obviously we're looking at an individual, that's their life, but it's based on something that's come before them. And that's why when you start to understand the qualities that are in a natal chart, this is what I'm going to be drilling this in for the next 3 months. This is the qualities of a natal chart are not the flaws of an individual. You want to understand this. It is the experience that they were born into that they imprint and then they move forward through life with. All right. So this is the way that I look at a natal chart. This is why I work therapeutically with people, because I'm looking at their whole experience of life, including what they've come in with. And when you start to understand that, you start to realize, oh, this is not like this is not describing a person's personality. There's one way of looking at the chart that way, but it's a response to the conditions that they were born into. You see, so all of it makes sense. Is that clearer?
Yes. Susan, can I also ask, because you said there, the sixth and the eighth house, there's issues with the person and their parents. Is that also true for the third house? Because at first you mentioned the third, sixth, and eighth, and then
Yeah, the third can be problematic, but for different reasons. It depends on the signs, then depends on the condition. The third house is problematic in the sense that it's a house of desire, the third house. It's about willpower and desire and cravings for experiences and so on, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But that third house can be the obstacle to, and let's call it's one of the karma houses. So this is where I start blending Indian and Western astrology. When you understand those, we will be looking at this, by the way, but just to quickly touch on it. The karma houses are the houses that bring pleasure. So we have the dharma houses, 1, 5, and 9. Then we have the artha houses. Artha means earth, which is also with reference to the material comforts. That's 2 and 6 and 10. What we need to establish in this 3-dimensional world to feel secure and successful. And we have the kama houses, which are 3, 7, and 11, which are the houses that tend to bring pleasure. And to the degree that you might overindulge in pleasure, the third house can become a problem. Potentially 7th house as well, and this 11th house as well. But that 7-11 combo is also maybe with reference to how you engage professionally. So it depends a little bit. So the third house, 7th and 11th, is also where we interact with people. Notice those are the social houses, right? And then the fourth, 8th, and 12th houses are called moksha. Moksha means liberation. It's freedom from this material bondage. So if you're all about that, if you're all about letting go of this material bondage, you're thrilled to have all this activity in the 4th, 8th, and 12th. But if you're supposed to be a prince and you're then meant to be a king, it's a little heavy having these placements there, because it shows that there's loss. It shows that there's something that has had to be surrendered or let go. There's something that has not been sustaining. And that is, from the material perspective, really hard to live through. And from the psychological perspective as well. But then when we get onto a spiritual place, it becomes extremely helpful. Does that make a little more sense?
Yes, thank you.
What are called dusthana houses, or the really challenging houses, are the 6th, 8th, and 12th houses. And that's because those represent elements of loss. They're things that take away from. And as part of that logic is what are called derived houses, which we're also going to be looking at. And the derived houses are how we get to the astrological readings. For example, when I say let's say we're doing a full moon reading, and I say, listen for your ascendant, for your sun, and for your moon. So a derived house is from the point of view of the ascendant, that's the simple layout of the houses from the ascendant. And if we do a derived house from the sun, as if it were the ascendant, then we start to see, oh, well, wait, we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we have Mars in the 4th house with Saturn and Pluto. Yikes, that's hard. And again, it goes beyond what I'm saying already, just about the ascendant and sun, right? So we're adding in extra elements. That's not easy. 4th house from the ascendant is ruled by Jupiter. Where's Jupiter? Oh, right. It's ruled by Mars. and it's in the 12th house, which is 12 houses from the person, meaning it's taking away from the person, and more importantly, it's taking away from the ascendant. So whenever the ruler of a house is 12 houses away, it always causes some kind of delay or difficulty. Like, for example, if somebody's 7th house ruler is in the 6th house, I know that they have issues in relationship, and I don't even care what the what is the ruler or what the house is. It doesn't even matter. I know if the ruler of the 7th house is in the 6th, we are going to have to discuss what is going wrong in relationships. And it'll have the flavor then of the planet and the sign that's involved, you see? So taking away from is the quality of the 12th house in and of itself. It's where we have to let go. It's the endings of things. And remember that we saw that there's not only the quality of Jupiter as the ruler of the ascendant, but Jupiter is the exaltation ruler of Cancer. It's ruling the sun, the moon, the north node in the 8th house. So we see that Jupiter itself is not in good dignity, because Jupiter's ruler, Mars, which is always problematic, by the way. Whenever you see a Jupiter in Scorpio, that's a wee red flag that we can explore as we go through different charts. Always a bit of a red flag, particularly so if it's in the 8th or the 12th. And then Mars, of course, is the ruler for that Jupiter. So it's also taking away. So there's compromise upon compromise, but it's not comfortable. So again, we're looking at this chart from the point of view of William as a person. We're looking at this chart from the point of view of this person who's got a public identity and who needs to do something with that, who's got an expectation about that. And then we're also looking at this from the point of view of William's parents before William is even born. This is all happening. So it's giving us different layers of understanding this person called William. Okay, and let me pause here to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense to you.
Honestly, you lost me when you said the ruler of the 7th house is in the 6th house. And I was going, okay, the ruler of the 7th house is Libra.
So the signs don't rule. Remember, it's only planets that rule. Signs don't rule. I'm not talking about this chart in particular. I was giving the example. Here we have, for example, the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th house. So taking away from. And if we had, and I was giving an example, if a person comes to me with a chart that has the ruler, not this one, but if the ruler of the 7th house is in the 6th house, I know that that issue for that person is their relationships. And why? Because that's taking away from the house of relationships. Something is causing a struggle within relationships. You can say for a number of different reasons, you can say that about all the different houses, and we'll see that as we go. So that's not with reference to William's chart. That was a general example, okay? Just like the example here with Jupiter ruling the ascendant, but coming from the 12th house. It's taking away from the 1st house, right? Because the house is the 12th house, whether it is the 12th from the ascendant or the 12th from the sun, for example, is by derived house, it still represents 12th house things, which is about loss and letting go and disappearance and death and the world beyond our eyes or behind our eyes, for example. It's also about deception. It's about what is hidden. And we could look at Joe Biden's chart and find a lot of that as well. He's also got a Sag rising with a ton of stuff in his 12th house. And that one of the things that he's known for is backroom dealings and dishonesty. So we can see those things showing up in the natal chart. And especially when a planet that is supposed to be about honesty and integrity, let's take the example of this one, the Jupiter, and when it's in a place where it's doubly damaged because it's got Mars as the ruler, where Jupiter's never uncomfortable. It's triply damaged, in fact. It's in the 12th house, ruling the 1st house, but in the 12th house. And it's ruled by Mars, which is also 12 houses away. Mars is in poor dignity, but it's got a very strong Venus. We'll talk about these things in a minute. But also it's retrograde. And that retrogradation means that we're not going to get the results that we would normally out of this planet, even regardless of all of the other stuff. So we know there's some issue here. We know, for example, in a woman's chart, Jupiter represents the spouse. And this Jupiter is for Diana, Charles. That would represent Charles. Well, Charles was sneaking out the back door all the way through their engagement and marriage. And that retrogradation, if you think of the planet Glyph as a cartoon character, it's trying to get out of there. It's trying to get out of this situation, which puts it in a social status position that it's not comfortable with. And also Charles has, I think it's at exactly that degree. He's got an eclipse. Was it his moon, I think. I have to pull up a chart. We can do family layers later on if you want. We'll keep going through the family lineage as we go. It's good to use really powerful public figures because we can measure the accuracy of what is showing in the chart very clearly. When it's not because I'm a royalist, on the contrary, but it's more that it's so obvious when we have decades worth of news around these people, we can track all of these different events. Okay, so let me check again. Have I lost you? Have I complicated?
I can follow, but like you irritated me when you talked about the 8th house and the sun and talking about Diana, because I always thought the moon stands for the mother and not the sun.
Yeah, the moon is also in the 8th house, but what Cancer represents is the mother.
Okay, so you were not talking about the sun and the moon.
I was. So Cancer is the sign of the mother, right? That's one of the symbolisms of the sign of Cancer, or one of the things that it symbolizes is mother, right? We covered that earlier when we were talking about the moon and everything, and Jupiter in Cancer. It's about pregnancy, it's about birth, it's about family, the mother, and so on. So Cancer represents the mother, even if the sun is in Cancer, but we see that the sun in his case is also in Cancer along with the moon, and it's also on Rahu. So we see that the North Node, this is a time around an eclipse, and we see that this has extraordinary importance in this person's life, right? So the combination between the ascendant in the 1st house being Sagittarius, it'll have a different flavor depending on the other signs. But the ascendant in Sagittarius combined with the sun, not the moon, just talking about the sun, the moon in another chart could be somewhere else, and the same basic storyline will be the same. The sun in the 8th house in Cancer represents a mother who is separated from the child, or has to be, or has run away or abandoned the child, or there's some kind of dilemma in the story of the relationship between mother and child. 8th house also represents issues of big loss and family trauma and secrets and big obstacles to overcome. And so that's why that combination, regardless of all the other stuff, which by the way has to also support that, but it always does, is why that combination right off the bat shows, okay, this person has really big mommy issues. It's a really big issue. And that person's mother, because it was before William was even born that this chart existed, that person's mother also has big mommy issues, and equally that person's father. So there are issues between mothers and children in this family. Okay.
If
Can I ask a
moon,
question?
Are you less
Oh,
upset now?
go ahead.
so if we're saying if moon is somewhere else, how do we know these nuances in the future that it's applicable for such situations? What exactly, because this is not about who's wearing what pants, that the mother's, it's not that situation indirectly, but how do we know this? And
So
I'm sure there is more.
This natal chart, 21st of June, 1982, is not only starting at that 21st of June, 1982, 2103. It's a snapshot in time of things that had already started, right? So what we see, this natal chart, which represents William as a snapshot in time, represents what has come before William and is producing all of this. And so this is the dynamic in the lives of the family and lineage, the generations before, and especially in his parents' experience at the moment that he's born. This is the transit chart for Charles and Diana at the moment that William is born, but it's also the transit chart of his grandparents and his great-grandparents and so on. You see? So there's a story built into a story built into a story in a natal chart. We can never, that's why I wanted to teach astrology, because if we take this as a flat two-dimensional thing and we say this is only about you, this has nothing to do with anybody else, this in this case William, this is only William, and we extrapolate everybody else, well, we think, well, okay, so William has this and that going on and so on, but then that begs the question, if you're really paying attention, the big question is why? Why is any of this causing William some upset? Why is any of this happening? Okay. So we see if a person has, and here's another sweeping generalization that is true without almost exception. I'm sure there are always exceptions, but this is the thing to remember as a general rule, is that if a person has a sun, which tends to represent the father, but it's in Cancer, that mother will have dominated the role of father. And so you will end up with a family where the mother is more, let's say, taking over the role, or the father, on the contrary, might be more maternal. So there's and again, that has to be seen by other elements of the chart. It'll have to be seen by all the other dynamics in the chart. All right. I want to keep checking.
Okay, I'll ask my question later.
No, go ahead now, and then we'll cover whatever's coming up.
I guess I'm feeling, and maybe it's just the time of day, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by the many different like rules. So like, for example, you're saying, when the sun is in the 8th house with Cancer, then you see this sort of dynamic. And I guess I'm wondering if, and maybe we will, but like from like a structured, like technical standpoint, like I guess, yeah, there's like a lot of like one-off rules that you've understood, and I'm wondering if like
Right. Well,
this is a matter of memorization of these dynamics,
yeah,
or
some of it is for sure. Let's strip it right back. I shouldn't have gone into these other details because it's too much for a beginner. I'm realizing that there's a lot of people who are really much more beginner than advanced beginner. So I don't know how to pitch it, so it's a little bit, we're having to learn from each other where the right tone is. Let's strip it right back and forget all about all of the other stuff and only go with rulership. Only that, and the dignities of the rulers, okay? So in this chart, we have an ascendant ruler, which is not in strong dignity, right? So I want somebody to tell me, why is the ascendant ruler in trouble? So we see already that means that the ascendant is in trouble, because that represents the individual or the project that this thing represents. And so where is the ascendant ruler, and why is that problematic for anybody who wants?
In the 12th house.
It's in the 12th house?
It's retrograde.
It's retrograde?
Its ruler is also 12 houses away.
Right.
It's in
And where is
opposite.
the ruler of the ascendant? So we have the ascendant ruled by Jupiter, which is ruled by Mars, which is ruled by
Venus.
Venus. And where is Venus?
In the 6th.
In the 6th house. So the 6th house is also another difficult house, right? It's a house of obligation and duty, and we got to work, and it's not really, I'm not having fun here, really. I'm doing it with dignity, Venus in her own sign, doing it with dignity, but I'm doing my duty.
Does Jupiter have a little bit of something good because it's on the MC?
Yeah, so that would be, for example, where it's visible. So what we see this person. You see that the MC represents what you do out in the world, what people see of you. It's how people see you, how visible you are, what you need to get on with, let's say, in this lifetime. And so we see this person for sure. We see this person out in the world, right? And of course, we have to also think that the benefics are always basically benefic, but are they working well for this individual? Or are they working well in general in terms of the quality that the benefic should be signifying in terms of Jupiter, when it's not in great shape, it can be very self-indulgent, right? It's about having fun. It's about having secret affairs. This is the house of bed pleasures, the 12th house. It's what's hidden. It's the house of sleep and what goes on in bedrooms. And so we see also that there's some kind of inherent tension there, but it's also visible. So both his father and himself, and also the mother in this case as well, so both had affairs, you see, extramarital affairs. So we see that this is, on the one hand, yes, we see Jupiter on the midheaven, big deal. Like we see this person. This person can't leave the house without being seen. But how they're seen is the question. And also when we see Neptune, but this is again, for those of you who are overwhelmed, you can skip these things. We'll focus later on the what you can call a hard and fast rule. When Neptune is on the ascendant, we don't see the person clearly. We see what they think you want to see, or we see what they present and not what is necessarily true. You see, that's also a retrograde Neptune ruled by this Jupiter in the 12th. All right, so we've followed the chain now. We've got the ascendant ruler, which is Jupiter. Jupiter's not super comfortable, so it's going to get itself into a bit of trouble. Jupiter represents the husband, it represents the dignity, it represents our faith, it represents honor and abundance and all of these other kinds of things. By the way, Jupiter as the ascendant ruler is also in the house of ancestors. So there's an ancestral story here. Jupiter also rules the 4th house, which is also the house of lineage and family and so on. So we see that there's part of that obligation comes through the ancestors. So then we see this Mars. Remember, Mars in Libra is considered to be in its fall. It's not that comfortable. So it's not able to take action in the way that it would like to. And this is the 11th house of the future and what the person's wishing for, hoping for, its friends and people you'd like to spend time with socially. And it's not comfortable. So it has to kind of shut up a little bit and do what other people want, right? Why? Because of duty, because of obligation. And it's on top of that, it's got Saturn sitting on top of it saying, you got to be serious. You have to do the right thing. Don't do what you want. Can't really do the thing that you want without getting into trouble. Can you see the chain of command here?
Mhm.
All right. Please let me know if it's not clear, because I'd really be happy to see them.
If there was something, for example, in the 4th, you would look at that if, I don't know,
Yeah,
because Jupiter rules the 4th, then you would take that in consideration if there was a planet there.
Sure, and that would give us elements, different elements, but we can also see that 4th from both the sun and the moon, 1, 2, 3, 4, is this mess. You see? Mars, Saturn, Pluto is 4th from the sun and the moon, and it's causing trouble, right? And where's it causing trouble? It's causing trouble from the ascendant perspective in the person's future. I've got this whole pile up here. I don't want any of this stuff. That's not what I want, but it's all my duty. And so if we look from the sun and the moon, if we imagine those are on the 1st house, we go, this is the 1st house, 12th house, and the 11th house. We find Venus in the 11th. So there's a lot of charm and there's a capacity to put on a display either way, because that's what we have to do. And part of the 11th house, the challenges that come are due to what? My siblings, my uncle, my cousins, my, the early life relationships, which are not comfortable. We've got to trine here between an uncomfortable Mars and that Mercury, which is standing alone in the 7th house. And again, here's another thing that I do, is that if this is below the horizon, below the descendant, I look at that Mercury as having a flavor of a 6th house Mercury, right? Even though it's in the 7th house by whole sign. And equally, if we take that same principle, we can look at this ascendant and say, well, that's the beginning of the 1st house in a quadrant house system. And Neptune is in the 12th house, as would be Uranus from the ascendant in that system. So I take those things on board, you see. This would be a ninth house Jupiter, the ninth house representing the father and what we believe, et cetera, et cetera. So these are extra layers. That's for those of you who are comfortable going beyond what we're talking about today. But even if we're only talking about family dynamics from the point of view of the rulerships, we see that there's very nicely done Venus. Venus is very, she puts on the right clothes and she puts on the right smile and she knows how to meet and greet and she knows how to do her duty in that sixth house. It's what she does because she's a very comfortable Venus in Taurus in a restricted area where she has to do this damn thing. And I never get a day off. Okay?
What question? It's a big difference to have 0 degree and 29 degree, and we do know this. But how sensitive is this Jupiter right now that it's like on the edge and the sun is on the edge? And how do you proceed with this personally?
Yeah, but that's also a very important part of reading the chart. It's right, the degree conditions of the planets, because especially that Jupiter is not just at the early degrees of Scorpio, but it wants to go back to Libra. It doesn't want to be here. It doesn't want this job. It doesn't want this experience. It wants to go away. It is trining the sun, trining the moon even, but very strongly trining the sun. And so we see that there's a certain amount of self-indulgence that's here. So Jupiter is 5 houses away from the sun. That's a very indulgent Jupiter, and it's in a Mars-ruled sign, and it's kind of sneaking around back into relationships. So we see this quality of they're not really giving the most stable, you could call it, results. So anything at 29 degrees, which is technically the 30th degree, or the 0 degrees, is always a little unstable. It's always a little bit touch and go, because it's either really done, it's really ready to move on, it's really done its job and ready to go, or it's just tenuous, it's a little new and it's not kind of figuring this out.
In the 11th house, are we trying to understand in terms of, I'm looking at it and seeing he doesn't really have that community that he's in, or friends.
Yeah, for
that
sure.
is
It's
not
hard
very
to fit
supportive.
in, right? It's hard to fit in when you've got these kinds of planets in the 11th house.
But there's no support there at all, I would say.
There's only support if you look at that rulership from the 6th house, which is I'm doing my duty. With Saturn, it's very dignified because it's got a dignified ruler, but she's doing it because she has to. You see, it's the 6th house obligation. This is what I have to do. This is my job. Do this thing. Therefore, I can have this. I'll show up on time. I'll do your damn speech. I'll do all these things that I have to do. I'll even sit on the throne. I'll do all these things, but I don't actually want to do this.
But can we say that even that is changing just because of Pluto there and causing turbulence?
Yeah, so we see that that would be part of the evolutionary sort of passage that he would have to go through, which is to overcome this challenge about fitting in, overcome the challenge to relationships, because that Pluto is in Libra, overcome the feeling of not belonging, the feeling of discomfort. And how? Well, it's in a sextile to Neptune on the ascendant. Is be real, man. Show up and be real. Say what you mean. Do the thing that you need to. When we have Mercury in the 7th house, even if it's in strong dignity, still it's a Mercury that is going to be cautious about what it says based on what it thinks other people want to hear. Right? So it's a strong Mercury. It's very chatty, very witty. He is very clever. He's got a great sense of humor. He's very social. We see that. We see the South Node is in Capricorn, ruled by this. It's also squared by and ruled by this Saturn that's in very strong dignity. Doing its duty is how this person started life. This is what I've been born to do this job. They have literally bred me to do this job. They didn't actually want a kid. They wanted another king. So here we've got this obligation that comes from Capricorn, 2nd house, the family aspect. And the North Node is in the 8th house. I wouldn't mind just a hug. I wouldn't mind being able to be emotionally intimate. I wouldn't mind being able to let my hair down and just be myself, be living in an experience of emotional and psychological and sexual intimacy that feels safe, feels nourishing. that it's hard. It's what he's craving, and it's not what he's getting. You see?
Question, isn't it that because he has his north node in no, sorry.
Yeah, North Node is in Cancer and in the eighth house.
Right.
So that's the aspect of understanding intimacy, connecting deeply, merging with another
Right.
person.
So he should transform. I mean, he came at this point, but isn't that the direction for his own family?
It's not so
The
much
work he
the
has to
family
do.
direction, it's the direction he wants to go in his life, or to be able to feel fulfilled. What I say about the North Node is it's on your deathbed, if you've accomplished that North Node quality, which has nothing to do with fame or wealth or whatever thing you've done out in the world. But if you've accomplished that, you feel like this was a great life. This was a worthwhile life. You see? So that aspect of the North Node is personal to William, but it was also impacting the parents, right? So that's part of their story in that moment by transit, but not their personal story.
Yeah, because his south node is Virgo, which is his duty.
No, the
Capricorn.
South Node is Capricorn.
It's Capricorn, yeah.
Second house, meaning I have my duty to my family. My family influences me in a very powerful way. The family dynamic is extremely strong. The second house, what supports you, part of that is the family, your own skills and what you can do. Well, he's got people skills. That's the Saturn ruling the second house in Libra. Remember what we saw about Saturn being in good dignity in Libra. It does, it ticks all the right boxes. It brings the best out of Libra. And especially when the rulership is really happy and strong, doing its duty, doing the job that it set out to do, it's going to be very socially strong, very socially adequate. But he's not happy with this. Part of when we see the nodal axis squared, especially when when that planet is one of the rulers of the nodal axis, as it is here, we see that there's what in evolutionary astrology they call a skipped step. The skipped step means that in previous experience of life, you didn't really learn this rule. And we see also that William has some interpersonal relationships. He doesn't show that publicly, but he has a lot of tension in personal relationships, especially with his brother. Mars here, trining Mercury. Mercury is 12 houses from the sun moon. That Mars is in poor dignity. There's some anger issues here, really strong anger issues, the story between the brothers. And the anger issues we see also because the ruler is ruled by a dysfunctional Mars. So there's a repression of anger. There's a repression of emotion here that he needs to learn to get towards, you see? There's the 8th house, 12th house dynamic, and the Mars in Venus ruled sign it's not able to express itself fully, and it needs to. And so what does it do? It pretends, the Neptune on the ascendant. I'm just going to pretend everything's fine, got to do this stupid job. But then when I close the door, I yell at the kids or I kick the dog or whatever. You see? So this is his journey, personal journey, that is intertwined with the parents' experience and the father doing his duty, not doing something for love. Okay.
It's also what jumps out, as you, Susan, I love how you call it omens. What jumped out at Harry, and I believe Kate has this significance of Capricorn, and that it's in his in the South Node, and it's amazing how to see all this connecting.
Kate has a Leo rising. We can look at her chart one time too. Kate has a Leo rising, and of course, the ruler of Leo is the sun. So that's very important then. Now the sun is in the 6th house for her in Capricorn. And so the sun is below the horizon, meaning that it's not a light. It's the light of the night chart is the moon, right? And the sun is also in the 6th house of obligation and difficulties, having to overcome difficulties. So we see that she also has this challenge with the father in a different way. In this case, it's the father, because we're talking about Leo Capricorn. And it's a big challenge that her parents also experience. So there's a whole bunch of, that's why these charts are really interesting to explore, because we can see multiple aspects of a person's life when they're famous. So we can obviously do this with an individual life, but we may not have enough recorded history, or we don't know the full story. But whereas we do, almost we're force-fed almost the story of the royal family. So this way we're proving the chart. This is something that you have to do before you sit down with a client. You have to prove the chart. If you're going to sit there and say, well, you've got issues with your mother, or anger issues, or issues with your brother, or you're resenting the fact that you're born into this damn family to begin with, you have to see that about 4 or 5 different ways in the chart before you're going to actually say any of that, or try and help your client through understanding that. You see, that's what's called proving the chart. So there's some, like, we could look at Venus and say, oh my gosh, she's in such great dignity. Look at that Venus. Relationships are amazing. This person has nothing but joy and abundance and bliss in their life. And it's like, okay, done. Look at that. There's a Mercury and Gemini. Sibling relationships are fabulous. Everything's fine. No problem. It's like, wait a minute. So you see, this is why the rulers matter in an extraordinary way, and why it matters also to understand how to put the whole of the chart together so that you're telling the bigger story. If we only tell the story of Mars, there's also a lot of complications that are not always true. So these are things that come up, and the things that come up by transit usually. So the transits will have, notice that they were the couple now, William and Kate, as a married couple, since you brought her up, were coping with this dilemma of the South Node going through Libra, the North Node going through his 5th house, Aries, where they seemed to have been going through some marital struggles. So you see, there's this whole dynamic that meant that the nodal axis was squaring his natal nodal axis at one point, which is a huge turning point where you have to kind of say, well, do I go left or right? Where do I want to go? Do I go up or down? It's a big turning point. All right, so I think maybe I've lost some of you there. I'm just going to stop this, see if you're still awake. And see how it's all going. So don't strain. This is a lot of information, and it's all recorded, and it's also going to be repeated ad infinitum until the end of March. So we have lots of time to look at different charts. We will look even in your charts. And here, by the way, is your homework, because this week you've got homework. Last week we were kind of just getting used to ourselves, but this week, aside from if you have the time to try and connect with somebody in an independent reading that you can swap, or even if just one of you wants to do that. Clara, yeah, no problem if you need to go. I think some of you need to go to bed, actually. I'll send you to bed. Yeah, thanks, Clara. So what you want to try to do is at the very least touch base with somebody. Even if you don't manage to read the chart, then you've got your buddy, and you can try and find a date next week or the week after and jump in at the deep end, and don't have the sense that I don't know enough. You know enough to just get by a couple of the things that are going on in the chart, and then you can work with each other and say, oh, did you notice that? And did you see this? And this was what my mom was like, and let's talk about what that moon feels like to me. This kind of thing, okay? The moon is emotions as well, so obviously it's their response to life, but it's also representing the mother. So then what I'd like you to do is, on your own, I'd like you to analyze your chart from the perspective, if you really are pressed for time, or you're really not sure about the whole thing, just from the perspective of your ascendant, okay? So what is my ascendant ruler? Is it in good dignity? Not. Is it happy where it sits in the chart? Is it affected by fall or exile or any of these other things that we looked at? Okay, you can start with that. If you're pretty good at astrology and you'd like to go a little deeper into the chart, you can do the ascendant, the sun, and the moon, and follow those 3 and trace your way through your chart. All right, so that would be, you can do that. And I would like to see the process if you have an opportunity. So you can do it 2 ways. You can either just write up a little blurb And it doesn't have to be poetic. You just write, sun, rulership, ascendant rulership, etc. And you just write the qualities that they have, that you just recognize that. And for those of you who are a little more ambitious and you really want to get into details, you can wax lyrical and even produce a little video. You can do a little mini video if you want. There's a thing called Tap Record. It's a free app that you can get, and you can record your screen. So you're looking at the chart on the screen, and you're just poking with the cursor like I do, and you're just pointing to different things, saying, look, this is my sun, this is my moon, this is my ascendant, this is what that means. Okay. Some of you will prefer the written part, and some of you will not do this at all, and that's fine as well. This is for you to experiment with that exploration of your chart. And if you're feeling really confident, you can go back and say, well, my parents were experiencing this. So I see the ascendant, I see the sun, I see the quality of the moon and how that reflects my mother. And this is what my parents were grappling with when I was born, okay, around the time that I was born. I leave it up to you to determine how comfortable you feel with any of that. But let's say the minimum would be you just show your ascendant and you say, my ascendant is in this sign, it's that planet, and it's ruled by this, or it's in its own domicile, for example. And how does that affect me? Because then you can say, well, this is the way I live that as this person who owns this ascendant. Right?
Susan, do you happen to have any kind of a list with significators, what you mentioned, like that we just have something to look at what's
for the signs and the planets? Yes, yeah. I can I'll bring something up and I'll put it in the course.
Especially in the beginning, I think this helps a lot if you kind of see the words that kind of shoot out.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I was aiming not for beginners, because that was the skipped step that I was hoping to miss, because it takes up a lot of time. So for those of you who need that, I'll put a list in the course. It would be, let's say, for the planets, the houses and the signs. Okay, we'll put those. There's also a really good book, and it's a poor title, but it's called, what is it called? Planetary Rulerships. I'll put the title of the book in there as well. I think it's actually called the Rulership Book, or some really silly name like that. But it's not about rulers. It's not about planetary rulers in the way that we've seen it. It's about significators. So the person should have called it the Planetary Significator Book. And it's all of, you open up to Venus and it's like, oh, it's hair combs and it's cars and it's like your toothpaste or whatever. So each of the planets has these particular significance. And so a lot of the significators of a sign come from the rulers as well. Okay, so the significator of Libra is part of the absorption of the signification of what Venus means, right? So that's part of the story, but it's also part of the signification of where it is in relationship to Aries and so on. So yeah, I'll put lists like that up there. And if you need stuff like that, you can put that in the WhatsApp group. So don't upload the homework, but rather send it to me via email, if you would. Alternatively, if you have a PDF, because in the WhatsApp group, it can be very interesting for each of you to notice, to see what everybody's talking about. If you're in the WhatsApp group, you can do this and send either the PDF of your little description or your chart or whatever with the description, or if you've done a little video, then, and when I say video, really like 5 minutes, it doesn't really have to go further than that, really short thing. And you put that in the WhatsApp group, because you can upload files in WhatsApp as well. So I leave that up to you, how public or private you would like it. And if you anyway send it to me via email, then if there's any complication or question, then I can also answer you and let you know what's stuck, or yes, it's all great, whatever you need. If you feel like you'd like feedback, you can get that, okay? And group feedback is helpful too, because there are a lot of people here that understand quite a lot. And you understand a lot more than you think. It's just that when you hear it all at once, you think, no, I can't, my brain is overloading. But when you look at it separately, you realize, actually, I do get this thing. And that's why I'm really focusing on you understanding, not learning from rote. I don't want you to remember. I want you to understand. I want you to know exactly why. So if I just say, for example, off the top, if a sun from somebody's ascendant is in the 8th house, why is that a problem? Let's talk from an aspect. Why is that a problem?
Because the first house can't see it. It's inconjunct.
It's inconjunct. It's not in another way of looking at it, it's not an easy aspect because I can't see what's there. Same thing in the 12th house. I can't see what's there. I know it's there, but it's not. Sun in the 12th house is usually people's fathers are not there, quite literally. So there's all of these things that you can start to look at, but from a place of deeply understanding that there's a big significance for all these things. It's not because somebody just wrote down a bunch of these ideas and we have to remember them, okay? And when you get that and you get that frame of reference and you start to look at the whole of astrology that way, you start to realize, wow, this thing is amazing. And then your readings will take a whole different level of understanding because you've understood something that is multidimensional. It's not a flat image of a person, a personality that you're reading for. Okay.
I'm sorry, Susan, you said sun in 12th house means their father wasn't there?
Yeah. They can be physically, they might be at the dinner table, but they're not really participating in the life of that person. They might be physically there, but overworking or mentally obsessed with a mistress or whatever, but they're not there really. They were not. And that, again, it doesn't mean forever. It means around the time that that person was born and in their early years, that person did not have a father figure that was present. And it can be that they become more present later on, but the developmental phase was lacking that, and that will still leave an imprint on the person in terms of their identity.
And same thing, the moon for the mother in the 12th house.
The moon for the mother, same thing, because the moon is checked out for whatever reason. She might be depressed or she might be unavailable. The 12th house can literally mean that the parent died. That can also be that. A person is orphaned. I see that with adopted people, for example. But it would have to be demonstrated by the quality of the rulerships and by the quality of the signs and so on, you see? So we can't just say, oh, 12th house sun, your dad, when did your dad die? So we have to find out what is the reason, what's going on behind all of that, you see?
Your father could be a mystic.
That's one way, but what we're looking at is from the personality, that individual will have the experience of the father figure as not being there. Okay. If the person is a mystic, they're not there because their feet aren't on the ground and they're whatever, but that person doesn't have the dynamic of the interchange with the father figure. Okay. That doesn't provide a solid container. And the sun, as representing that sense of self, is very important in terms of what the father interaction with the father was. Okay. That describes how the person feels about themselves on a psychological level. It doesn't mean they can't be fantastic at their career. On the contrary, often the fathers are not there because of their career, but it doesn't work so well for the father, from the father point of view, right? For the kid. So these are things that you'll start to know by heart by the end of our time together, so you can see. And if that's your case, for example, if you have a sun in the 12th or your moon is in the 12th, and especially if it's the ruler, then you can describe, well, this is how my father was when I was young. This is what was going on. Or he was a traveling salesman, or he was a diplomat and had to go off for months at a time, or whatever. And all of that is possible. Or he left and I never knew my father, for example. That can happen too. So all of these different things have to be backed up or proven by the other aspects of the chart, the planetary interactions, the quality of the planets, quality of the rulers. And it should be repeated at least 3 times by different placements. So we want to hear the same story at least 3 times coming from different parts of the chart. Right? All right, I think I've overwhelmed some of you, underwhelmed maybe some others, but anyway, I think we'll call it a day. And I will certainly post this recording for you. You'll have that in the course platform, so you can look at that again. The recordings will probably be up this evening, but the transcript will be tomorrow probably, okay? and you can read your way through, either following along or just reading your way through. And any final questions before we finish up?
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Susan.
All right. Good luck. Be brave. Huh? We're all here to help each other. So, all right.
Thank you.
Have a good bon dimanche, as they say. Have a good Sunday.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.